Sound effects can be pretty tricky. There's a few things that we need to be aware of. Firstly, how we stack them together. It's not quite as simple as you might imagine. And also we're going to have a bit of a chat today about the overall impact on volume that sound effects have. But first of all, this stacking situation. We've got a guitar part over here with delay and reverb sends on it. Now I've got some pre-recorded guitar parts up here, and I'm just going to play the one that's some sharp guitar stabs. If you want to download a copy of these audio files, check out the Patreon link below. You'll be able to get all of this stuff. Okay, so let's hear the guitar part. Really, really simple, all on its own with the delay and reverb sends. Okay, we can hear both delay and reverb. Everything's working perfectly well. Well, actually it isn't. There's a problem there, and it's masked a little bit by the fact that the delay time is so fast. If I slow the delay time right down, you should be able to hear what the problem is. The initial guitar stab has reverb, and none of the repeats do. They're all bone dry. And when you think about it, that completely stands to reason. What we've actually got here is 3 independent copies of the signal. The first dry one is going through the track and straight out to the stereo out bus. The second copy is being thrown to the delay bus, and once it's there, it goes through the delay unit and then off to the stereo out. That's the significant bit. That signal never gets anywhere near the reverb. We've then got a third audio stream being sent directly to the reverb from the original dry signal. That gets reverb applied to it, and we hear that. So we hear that first initial stab of guitar chord because it's going to the reverb send over here. But all of the repeated notes that are being generated by the delay unit are completely dry. Now that might be the effect you want. That's absolutely fine. We're not talking about a deliberate decision here to have all the delay repeats dry. We're talking about an accident, something that you're unaware of, and if you knew that this was the situation, you'd fix it. So once again, it comes down to subjective decisions. You need to have the information beforehand in order for you to be able to make the decision. So we've decided we want all of these delay bounces to be reverbed. Well, there's multiple different ways that we can accomplish that. The first one, and this is a hack, is to move the reverb onto the delay send. So now we don't need this independent reverb send at the bottom of the original track. We're just basically sending once, and all of the information is going through both effect units. Let's hear what that sounds like. Now we've got the opposite problem. The original guitar chord is bone dry, and all of the repeats have got the reverb on them. And again, that completely stands to reason. We've taken away, there is no reverb track, so there's nothing to send to. The only means by which we can get reverb is by sending into the delay. The problem with that is that this delay unit is grabbing the entirety of the sound. In other words, it's set 100% wet. So when the signal gets into this delay unit, nothing's getting out until that beat passes. If our delay time is 1/4 in 4/4, it's going to wait an entire beat before passing any sound at all onto the reverb unit. And so what we're hearing in that first beat is the original, unadulterated, completely dry signal. Then everything goes through both units simultaneously, and we finally hear the reverb. Well, while we're in hack mode, there's a way that we can accomplish it in a roundabout way using this current configuration, and that's to turn the mix knob on both of the effects down. So ordinarily, when you have send effects, you set them 100% wet, which means the entire effect is operating as hard as it possibly can. You control how much of that effect you hear by the send level. If we turn these send levels right down, you'd hear a very, very tiny amount of delay. But typically with send effects, you have a 100% mix. So if we set our two blend levels to 50%, and I'll set the delay send to 0 dB, so the full signal is being sent into the delay unit. Let's hear what that sounds like. So that's a pretty good approximation of what we want. We're hearing all of the effect all of the time through both units. But as I said earlier, it's a hack. The reason that we're getting this effect, and the reason why it sounds kind of pretty close to what we want, is because we're letting part of the dry signal through the entire chain. Only 50% of the send is going into the reverb circuit, 50% of it's passing straight through. Of that signal, 50% of the remaining signal is going into the reverb unit, and we're hearing the reverb, and 50% of that remaining amount is still dry and gets to the outside world. So to cut a long story short, a quarter of the sound that we send into this pair of effects is getting back to the stereo out without ever having been touched at all. Well, that's not great. You can mess around with the blend levels and get yourself to a stage where it sounds fine. And then you're going to hit another roadblock because you've configured those two different effects and mixed those two blends together for this one track, for this one purpose. Well, the whole idea of having sends is that you've got this global system-wide effect that you can send multiple tracks into. If you want a different combination of delay and reverb coming out of your synth sound, you're screwed, you can't do it. So before we get any further down that rabbit hole, we're going to abandon that attempt. That's not the way to do it. One way that we can accomplish the effect is by sending straight out of the delay into the reverb. So we've now daisy chained the effects together. The original track sends into the delay, goes through the delay unit, then sends to the reverb bus, which goes through the reverb effect and off to the stereo out. Let's see what that sounds like. So now we're back to the problem where we've got no reverb on our original sound. The first guitar stab is now bone dry because, again, the signal's got to pass through. Thank you very much, Mix Console. Always on top, please. Come on. The original sound's got to pass through the delay unit. The delay unit's set back to 100% mix, and so it's sticking in this unit for a whole beat before it gets onto the reverb unit. Let's turn this send back on. Problem solved. So now, despite the fact that some of our levels are wrong, I mean, there's obviously way too much effect all over the place here. I'm doing this for demonstration purposes, but we have actually solved the problem. We've got all delay and all reverb all the time. Everything works. The original dry signal is being sent to both units, so the first guitar stab is getting reverbed. Then later on, once the signal's spent its beat amount of time waiting in the delay unit, it gets passed on to the reverb send, and all of the repeated notes go through the reverb and get to stereo out. Job done. But that's another problem because now we've permanently hardwired these two sends together. Everything that you send into the send bus is being passed on to the reverb 100% of the time. That's how it's routed. That's not great either. So let's abandon that. So the most flexible solution to the problem is to put a send on the delay track itself. So now let's have a think about each of these individual routes. Route 1, dry, straight to the outside world. Awesome, here you dry signal. Route 2, into the delay unit, gets stuck in the delay unit for a beat, finally gets passed to the reverb. Reverb sends to the reverb effect, gets to the outside world. Route 3, original sound, dry, straight from the reverb send into the reverb effect, off to the outside world. So this is how to accomplish your effect with the maximum degree of flexibility. Now we can start tailoring these sends to more reasonable levels so that we can get something approximating the sound we actually want. pretty good to me. So now on to part 2. What's all of that done to the volume? Well, we've got a couple of meters here. The top instance of Insight is listening directly to the guitar track itself. So this is basically hearing the guitar as played. This lower copy of Insight over here is on the stereo bus. First things first, turn both sends off. Just to get a baseline, both of these meters are going to read exactly the same value. Okay, there we go. So that's just showing that input equals output. Now I'm going to send to the reverb unit, and I'm going to send the entire signal, 0 dB, into the reverb unit. Reset my meters. Let's see what we get now. This is a concept with which you're very familiar. If you've got 5 people speaking in a room, it's louder than 1. Now, the perfect mathematical model of constructive interference results in a doubling of the sound if they're both absolutely identical. I've got a very quick demo of this. I've got a simple sine tone set up on this track. And if we monitor the synth track instead, with no send, the input signal is exactly the same as the output signal. Now I'm going to send the entire signal to a completely empty send bus. Signal's going to double in volume. Don't worry about the integrated value, it's the short-term value. There's a 6 decibel difference between the input and the output. So that's a really simple demonstration of 2 copies of a thing make the volume double. But of course, we're not dealing with the absolute purity of a replicated sound here. We're dealing with reverb and delay and lots of sonic intricacy. You know, those waves are interacting with each other in a far more complex way than simple repetition. So we don't get a simple doubling of sound, but it does get louder. So now we're back on our simple guitar stab with reasonable amounts of send. Now this is where loudness meters can trip you up. Pay very close attention to the short-term signal, which is basically mapping the last 3 seconds worth of sound, and the overall integrated loudness, which is the total loudness of everything Cubase is going to hear in this audio session. So the short-term value is louder in the lower monitor, but the overall loudness is louder in the upper monitor. That's a consequence of the way that loudness units are calculated. When there's complete silence in a signal, the loudness meter shuts down and stops listening. So because there are greater periods of silence in the sparse, unaffected guitar signal, the loudness meter is stopping any kind of calculation, whereas the delay bounces as they fade away are keeping the meter alive, and so we're getting false readings. If you don't want to see that kind of stuff, you basically need to turn your gate off. There's a feature in Insight, different loudness meters are going to do this in different ways, but you can actually disable the gate entirely on the meter to say never stop listening. Even if the signal is completely absent, you carry on doing your calculations all the time. And now the lower monitor is louder in both instances. I'll turn the gate back on because it's, generally speaking, more useful than not having it on. Now if I pick a different guitar part that's more active, that's got more stuff going on, you're going to get different meter readings. So there's some kind of sound going on all the time now. We're about 1.5 dB. So we can compensate for that by reducing the volume of the original track by 1.5 dB. Now the output's the same level as the input. This is another one of those completely subjective decisions Because you're adding reverb to a sound, it's going to push it further back in the mix. You might need a volume boost in order to make it feel like it's at the same level, but you need to understand the science before you can make your proper subjective decisions about what to do with it. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit the like button. I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.